Buddhism teaches non-duality in the 128 dissolution of the individual being in nirvana. Christianity, duality and the perpetuation of the purified individual being in a formal heaven. Actually, I had first envisaged the book simply as a comparison of Buddhism and Christianity. Only later it occurred to me that reference to the coexistence of the two types of doctrine in Hinduism, non-dualism and dualism, knowledge and worship, both recognized as valid and sometimes even taught by the same guru, according to the needs and understanding of the disciples, would make it much easier to explain how both alike could be valid paths. In this book, some reference to the doctrine of avatars was a necessary part of the theme. The word is used rather loosely nowadays, but technically there are 10 avatars in the whole course of the Manvantara, that is, of the Adamic cycle. The 7th is Rama, whose story is told in the Ramayana. The 8th is Krishna and its gospel, the Bhagavad Gita. The function of the 10th, who is still to come, is the consummation of this cycle and inauguration of the next, which means that he is equivalent to the second coming of Christ. The 9th is described traditionally as the foreign avatar. It is generally agreed he has already appeared, and he is sometimes identified with Buddha, sometimes with Christ. My thesis was that the 9th avatar consists of the twofold establishment of a proselytizing religion based on the love or compassion of the founder, in the form of Buddhism and non-duality for the East, Christianity and the dualistic worship of a personal God for the West. Having finished Buddhism and Christianity, I decided that I would not write another book unless the time came when I should be able to write one purely of guidance on the quest and should feel that it was legitimate for me to do so. As I have already explained, outer activity is useful on Bhagavan's path. 129 But it should be aloof activity which keeps the mind working smoothly on the surface while underneath the current of meditation can continue. Emotionally involved activity, on the other hand, is harmful, since it turns the mind outwards, absorbing it in the activity and thereby impeding spiritual progress. Such activity may be of various kinds, but 3 of them are particularly dangerous, and also particularly alluring. 2 of these I have mentioned already, reading and acting the guru. Writing is the 3rd. It is not reading itself that is harmful but absorption in it, unless, of course, it is the sort of reading that serves as a spiritual reminder, turning the mind in the right direction. The sort of aloof, critical reading that I was doing remained a surface activity and could do no harm. Similarly, there is no harm in giving help and advice on the path when the need to do so comes one's way, but one who makes himself responsible for the spiritual welfare of others is turning his mind outwards, entangling it in worry and anxiety, and thereby impeding his own progress. Writing also is an activity into which a man normally throws himself wholeheartedly and which therefore impedes his spiritual progress. I felt that I should desist. The same thing can be expressed in a more doctrinal way. It is not actions that impede one's sadhana or spiritual strife but the vasanas, that is the deep-seated desires or tendencies giving rise to the actions. Indeed, sadhana is sometimes represented simply as the elimination of vasanas, since it is these which turn the mind outwards, fling one into unnecessary activity, and drag the consciousness back to rebirth after this life has finished. Aloof or routine activity which does not nourish the vasanas is harmless, only emotional activity is dangerous. This also explains 130 why unintelligent asceticism, not that all asceticism need be unintelligent, fails of its purpose. It attacks the actions produced by the vasanas instead of the vasanas themselves, which may drive them to seek other outlets or to grow and fester in the dark. Intelligent self-discipline, whether asceticism or not, attacks the vasanas themselves. Self-enquiry, the most direct and efficacious method, does not even do that. It dispels the illusion of the ego which has the vasanas. Restricting activity is like trying to kill a tree by picking off the flowers and fruit. Attacking the vasanas is like breaking off the branches. Self-enquiry is like uprooting the tree. The worst method is to try to destroy the vasanas by gratifying them. That has the opposite effect, like trying to put a fire out by pouring oil on it. Nevertheless, it may happen that indulging it can finally exorcise a more or less innocuous remnant of a vasana. I think it is Sri Ramakrishna of whom the story is told that he had once desired a silk shawl and a gold chain. So he asked for them and sat on the bank of the Ganges wearing them. Then, saying, "Now I have had my desire," he took them off and threw them into the Ganges. It is possible that in a similar way the writing of these books extinguished what vestige still remained of the urge to write. However, to have continued would have fanned the flame again. At the same time that I stopped writing, and for the same reason, my wife gave up painting. She had not previously known that she could paint. Indeed, when she was young it was music that was her great passion and to which she would have dedicated her life had circumstances been propitious. However, in Calcutta, Frania, our youngest daughter, began to take art lessons and, in order to encourage her and find out her difficulties, my wife also began to paint and found that she could. When we returned, 131 to Tiruvannamalai, she began to see everything, mountains and clouds, trees and flowers, with the eye of a painter, as glorious arrangements of line and color. Particularly she wanted to make pictures of Arunachala and of our house and garden to send to people. For a start, she decided to paint the garden as seen from our veranda, with the hedge full of flowering cactuses at the end of it and Arunachala rising up behind. Frania had left for an art school in England by this time. She had left some paints behind for her mother to use, but they turned out to be inadequate and some of them dried up. Unwilling to relinquish her project, my wife decided to use oil crayons. She had done 1 or 2 attractive crayon paintings in Calcutta. Just when she was starting she got a whitlow on her finger and had to stop. When that was better, something else interfered. When the picture finally was completed, a rat tore it up at night to make a nest for its young. We took all this as a sign that she should not waste her energies on painting. Housekeeping was not a distraction from meditation, painting was. This does not mean that I am a Puritan opposed to art and literature. It depends what the alternative is. If the alternative is a superficial or materialistic life, art and literature are an ennoblement of it, but if the alternative is a more direct spiritual effort, they are a distraction. At the beginning of a religion, as happened, for instance, in Taoism, Buddhism, Christianity and Islam, art and literature are normally either deprecated or ignored, because the powerful wind that then blows turns men to direct spiritual effort. But when the white heat has cooled down to a colored glow, art and literature come to be not merely condoned but encouraged as a means of turning men's minds from worldly values to spiritual, leading them gradually through harmonized form to the formless. Therefore a wealth, 132 of religious art arose in these same religions in their medieval periods, the mystic power of Taoist painting and Mahayana sculpture, the Gothic cathedrals of Christendom, the poetry of the Sufi saints and the lace-like arabesques of Islam. For the same reason, various forms of art and literature are not merely encouraged but actually used as techniques of training on some indirect spiritual paths, but on the direct path of self-enquiry they are a hindrance. Before I stopped writing, I still had 2 books to edit and 1 to revise. However, this was work which could be done aloofly. Moreover, the editing involved constant preoccupation with the writings and sayings of Bhagavan and was therefore a help and inspiration on the path, not a hindrance. Bhagavan had written little, 2 prose expositions and 2 in verse, a few miscellaneous poems and the 5 hymns to Arunachala. All of these had been translated into English and the ashram had published them as separate booklets. Ever since the death of Bhagavan, I had been trying to persuade the ashram to put them all together into 1 volume, so that it would be large enough for booksellers to stock and newspapers to take notice of. Soon after Buddhism and Christianity was finished, the ashram president told me that they had decided to do so and asked me to edit it. This was published by Writers as the collected works of Ramana Maharshi, while the ashram also brought out an edition for sale in India. Apart from the actual writings of Bhagavan, there were various collections of talks with him and of his sayings, the 2 largest being the 750-page talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi and the 2-volume Day by Day with Bhagavan. Both of these were in the form of diaries and therefore contained a lot of repetition, with no arrangement according to subject. For the benefit of 133 the general reader, I decided that it would be advisable to take passages both from the various recorded talks and the written books and fit them together according to subject. A certain amount of editorial comment was necessary, explaining and connecting the various passages, but it was kept to moderate proportions and printed in a different type so as to be distinguishable at a glance from the words of Bhagavan himself. This book also, entitled The Teachings of Ramana Maharshi in his own words, was published both by Writers and the ashram. The only other task remaining was the revision of the Cosmology of the Stars, the book I had written in camp on the philosophy underlying astrology. There was really no need to bother with it, but I have a tidy mind and do not like leaving loose ends, so I dug the typescript out of the cupboard where it had been lying. To my surprise, I found that it required very little change in substance but had to be completely rewritten in order to eliminate the arrogant and aggressive tone that had permeated my style under the influence of Gwenon. I sent it to York, but he decided, probably quite rightly, that there would not be sufficient market for such a book, so it remained unpublished. C.S. Copyright. Brief Eternity. It was about 6 o'clock one June morning in 1956 that the first awakening to reality occurred. I was alone in the room when I awoke and sat up in bed. My wife and Frania were sleeping in the next room, and Catherine had already married and left us. I just was, myself, the beginningless, immutable self. I had thought, nothing has changed. In theory I already understood that it is not anything new. What is eternal cannot be new, what is new cannot be eternal. The only description is what Bhagavan has given, it is as it is. Only now I experienced it. There was no excitement, no joy or ecstasy, just an immeasurable contentment, the natural state, the wholeness of simple being. There was the thought, it is impossible ever to be bored. The mind seemed like a dark screen that had shut out true consciousness and was now rolled up and pushed away. Of course, it is a paradox to speak of the mind being rolled up and at the same time of thoughts coming. Similarly, the mind of the realized man, such as Bhagavan, is said to be dead. 135 But he has thoughts. It seems quite natural when it happens. Perhaps the best explanation would be that the mind is an active center originating ideas, imagination, plans, worries, hopes and fears ceases to function, but the mind as a mirror condensing pure awareness into thoughts still works. The thought or feeling that it is impossible ever to be bored may seem banal at such a time, but actually it was fundamental. It is the mind that craves activity and feels bored when it does not get it. The self is untouched by activity and abides in its pristine state of simple happiness. From my window at the corner of Park Street I saw the roofs of houses with crows wheeling between them. Again there was a paradox, the feeling that all this was at the same time both real and unreal. This is a paradox that has been much commented on, because it is stressed in Zen teachings. It is what Tennyson was trying to express in a line of The Princess, where he says, "And all things were and were not." I do not know how long the experience lasted. In any case, while it lasted it was timeless and therefore eternal. Imperceptibly the mind closed over again, but less opaque, for a radiant happiness continued. I had my bath and shaved and dressed and then went into the sitting room, where I sat down and held the newspaper up in front of me as though I was reading it, so that no one would see the radiance. I was too vibrant with happiness really to read. The afterglow continued for several weeks, only gradually fading out. Why did I want to hide the radiance? Why did I not shout and dance with joy? I suppose because I have a dour Capricornian temperament beneath the surface exuberance of Sagittarius and am shy of exhibiting any feeling. At about the same time my wife also had a glimpse of realization. It was a great help and support to be together on 136 the path, and often our experiences tallied. Frania also had such a glimpse some 18 months later. The birth anniversary of Bhagavan falls in late December or early January, varying with the phase of the moon. On this occasion a Tamil devotee living in Calcutta invited us to a celebration on the terraced roof of his house. There must have been about 100 people gathered there. The previous day there had been a meeting in a public building and speeches had been made, but this evening there was only the singing of religious songs. I could see from the beauty and serenity of Frania's face that she was enjoying exceptionally good meditation. Later I learned that it was even more than that. What she described was transparently genuine, and indeed, so little theory did she know that she would have been incapable of expressing it had it not happened. Afterwards she wrote it down. I am not the mind nor the body. Found myself in the heart, the me that lives after death. There was breathtaking joy and a feeling, I am, the greatest possible joy, the full enjoyment of existence. No way to describe it. The difference between this joy and complete happiness of the mind is greater than between the blackest misery and the fullest elation of the mind. Gradually, rapidly, my body seemed to be expanding from the heart. It engulfed the whole universe. It didn't feel anymore. The only real thing was God, Bhagavan, Arunachala. I couldn't identify myself as any speck in that vastness, nor other people. There was only God, nothing but God. The word, I, had no meaning anymore. It meant the whole universe. Everything is God, the only reality. As this revelation of truth to one so young both in years and in meditation illustrates, a glimpse of self-realization is not necessarily a token of progress made on the path, at any rate in this lifetime. If it seems bathos to assert that glimpses of the 137 Supreme State can occur to people who have no understanding of it and have never sought for it, the answer is that the Supreme State is also the natural state, the true state of every man and woman born, if only they knew it. And therefore the wonder is not that it should be occasionally glimpsed but that it should be so widely ignored, that most people should be content, or only vaguely discontent, to go through life circumscribed by the evidence of the physical senses and the rational mind, believing that to be all there is, blind to reality, blind to their own self. There are three possibilities. The first is the occurrence of glimpses of self-realization to people who have no theoretical knowledge of what it means, that is of the supreme identity, who follow no spiritual path, and indeed do not even know that any path or goal exists. Tennyson, to whom I have already referred, was an example of this. He has described it vividly in a private letter. A kind of waking trance I have frequently had, right up from boyhood, when I have been all alone. This has generally come upon me through repeating my own name 2 or 3 times to myself, silently, till all at once, as it were out of the intensity of consciousness of individuality, the individuality itself seemed to dissolve and fade away into boundless being. And this is not a confused state, but the clearest of the clear, the surest of the sure, the weirdest of the weird, utterly beyond words, where death was an almost laughable impossibility, the loss of personality, if so it were, seeming no extinction, but the only true life. I am ashamed of my feeble description. Have I not said the state is utterly beyond words? Actually, the term, waking trance, is unfortunate because there is nothing trance-like about it. On the contrary, it is, the clearest of the clear, the surest of the sure, a realization of pure, indubitable reality, of one's own true state. 138 anthologies of such experiences have been published, and those who wish to can refer to them. It will seem, however, on studying them, that by no means all are glimpses of actual self-realization. More common are experiences that may be termed intermediate, that is, of divine grace or of the supernal wonder of God's creation when seen aright. There is a vast range of such experiences accessible to mystics and to wayfarers on the various paths. However, the traveler on the direct path does not seek them, he seeks only the self that has the experiences. The second possibility that I have in mind is the occurrence of a glimpse of self-realization as an introduction to the path or an encouragement to set forth upon it, as happened with Frania. This also may occur to someone with no previous knowledge, so that the difference from the first possibility mentioned is rather dynamic or functional than static, rather in the effect of the experience than in the experience itself. The following feed by Ankila Longmans is an account of a life shaped henceforth by such an experience. The experience itself is admirably described. It was as if I had moved, in my mind, away from the central place, as if I had always sat on a throne in mid-consciousness, administrating my affairs, and had stepped down. It was positive, and I cannot, by taking thought, repeat. It had the stillness of humility shining with surprised joy. Then, precisely as if that moving off the center of my own consciousness had set some machinery going, it happened. How can I explain? I can only use negatives. I saw nothing, not even light. I heard nothing, no voice, no music, nothing. Nothing touched me. Nor was I conscious of any being, visible or invisible. 139. But suddenly, simply, silently, I was not there. And I was there. It lasted for a moment, yet it was eternal, since there was no time. And I knew, as certainly as I know I am trying to write it down, as certainly as I know that I live and eat and walk and sleep, that this world, this universe, is precisely as we see it, hear it, know it, and is at the same time completely different. It is as we see it because we are of it, it is also and at the same time wholly other. But it was not an inkling, it was complete. Yet I do not know in what ways the earth appeared different. It was not different materially. It still had form and color, even good and evil, and animals and people, but it was conceived differently, as a whole, perhaps, as a spiritual entity. And it filled me with awe and grave joy and certainty, since I knew for always that it was and no other and that all was well, that it was the answer to all questions. I had no vision of God, or of any person, no vision of Christ, or of any spiritual being. Yet it was all that is, and there was no God, and equally no not God. It was whole and of the Spirit. No words can make it clear. All I can say is that the wholeness seemed akin to that part of me that I should call spirit, as if my spirit were part of it and could not be separated from it. How long the experience lasted I have no idea, but I think it was momentary. When it ceased I felt as though I had expended a great deal of time, and that, equally, there was no time in that moment. That timelessness was the clearest impression. pp. 20-21. It is noteworthy that, as an after effect of this experience, she felt precisely as I had when first reading Gwenon. So now I know, and it is all true, and I have always known it. This feeling. 140 that one has always known it but did not know that one knew is an important symptom, showing that, even at the very beginning of the path, there is nothing new, the truth is not discovered but recognized. In a case like this, what I said in an earlier chapter about the alternate manifestation of higher and lower tendencies is apt to apply with peculiar force. The introduction to the path, being so resplendent, is apt to call out all that is best in the person, making him radiant with a new beauty, but, since equipoise is a natural phenomenon, this may be followed by a correspondingly extreme upsurge of his lower tendencies, causing a period of great stress in himself and of distress to those connected with him, before a temporary equilibrium is reached and battle joined between the two forces in him. The third possibility is that of the seeker in quest of realization. It was in speaking of this that Bhagavan warned his followers not to expect self-realization immediately to become permanent, explaining that time and effort are needed to stabilize it and to dissolve the vasanas or lower tendencies which drag one back from it even when momentary glimpses appear. If it seems unjust to the wayfarer that others should receive in apparently unearned largesse that for which he has striven so long without avail, this also is an opportunity for self-enquiry. Who is it that strives unavailingly? Who am I? Despondency itself is an error and therefore an impediment to realization, as I have explained in Chapter 8, since it means accepting as real the existence of the unreal, that is, of the apparently unsuccessful ego. Even looked at from a lower, individual plane, there is no injustice, since no experience of realization can come to one who is not ripe for it, whether the ripeness has been 141 attained in this lifetime or a previous one. When the sun rises, not all buds burst into flower but only those who are ready for flowering. It is no use accusing the sun of injustice. All that one has to concern oneself with is becoming fit and ready. In this, no less than in worldly matters, the injunction of the Gita is to be observed, to concern oneself with performing the right action, not with grasping at the reward of the action. Irrespective of visible results, this lifetime should be used for spiritual development, for ripening towards realization of that ultimate identity which eternally is, whether realized or not. Indeed, the only real tragedy is a lifetime wasted on meaningless living, not turned to spiritual effort. A glimpse of self-realization can be regarded as a breach in the prison walls of the ego. Its occurrence does not rest with the aspirant. What rests with him is the steady work of erosion, wearing the walls away, until at last they become paper thin and ready to collapse. The mind must be completely saturated by understanding of non-duality, that there is only the one self. It is not enough to hold this as a theory. Even this mental permeation, however, is only a preliminary, preparing one for the constant practice of self-inquiry, which will gradually set up the current of awareness. Even though the sun of truth has not yet risen, the state of such a man is very different from one who stumbles blindly through the dream of life, taking its appearances for reality. Different even from one who awakens occasionally to glimpses of a reality he does not understand. It is a fuller, more vital, more blessed state, where life, the whole of life, has beauty and significance, and yet, paradoxically, the deprivation of life would be no tragedy, since it is spiritual awareness, not physical life. 142 That is the reality. Indeed, that is why the question that any religion teaches about the afterlife is relatively unimportant and can interest only philosophers and theologians. Judaism and the original Taoism say nothing on the subject, while Buddha refused to answer questions about it, and therefore scholars gravely argue whether they believed in survival or not. From a spiritual viewpoint, death is not important. There is no existence of the unreal and no non-existence of the real, either before death or after. If the ego does not exist now, it does not exist after death either. If an illusory ego seems to exist now, it will seem to exist after death also. The thing to do is to strive to awaken to reality now, in this lifetime, and then, as Bhagavan said, death can make no difference, no further change is possible. Retirement. During our stay in Calcutta, we usually spent the summer holidays at Tiruvannamalai. The journey itself consumed a week, there and back, leaving only about a month to stay there, sometimes less, and at the hottest time of the year, but it was worth it. We appreciated every day of it. Even though the meditation can be continued in any place, there is a vibrant peace at Tiruvannamalai that is immensely invigorating. One holiday we spent at Kalimpong in the Himalayas, but the atmosphere was empty and flaccid in comparison. We visited Shantiniketan in West Bengal, where Tagore had lived and where he founded his university, but felt no living presence. Altogether, we have traveled little and seen few swamis or holy places. As long as the children were at school in the hills, we naturally used to spend the hot season with them, and later, when I was working, we were drawn nearly every holiday to Tiruvannamalai. In any case, we had little impetus to travel or 144 explore. After Bhagavan, who else is there to see? We began to feel the same also about Arunachala. Not that visits to holy men and holy places are deprecated. They can undoubtedly be beneficial, although, as I said before, the visitor should keep his wits about him and judge carefully whether everything is as holy as it is reputed to be. Only for one who has come under the influence of Bhagavan, indeed, for one who has the right guru, it becomes unnecessary. We met the Dalai Lama when he came as a state guest to Calcutta in 1956. A Bengali publisher had persuaded me to write a simple life of Buddha to be used as a school or college reader. Since the Dalai Lama's visit occurred just when it was finished, we had the idea of asking him to write a brief foreword for it. I was glad that we did, because this gave us the opportunity to meet him, and I found him a person of great beauty. Beneath his charm of manner, he made an impression of real power and integrity. We were granted a private interview. He was gracious and interested to know what path we were following. We were not able to explain very successfully, but I presented him with a copy of Ramana Maharshi and the Path of Self-Knowledge and also left a copy of the little book on Buddha with him. Next day the interpreter gave it back, telling us that it had been read in translation to the Dalai Lama, who had approved of it and written a short foreword stamped with his official seal. I collected a foreword from the Panchen Lama also, but in him I felt no spiritual presence at all, just a young man in an important position. As soon as I said that the Dalai Lama had written a foreword, he said that he would too. I met the Dalai Lama again in Madras in 1960, when he was touring South India, no longer as a ruling monarch but as a refugee. He looked reduced and rather pathetic, but 145 his charm of manner remained, and there was the same impression of integrity. Incidentally, the publisher failed to get the Board of Education of any of the states in India to prescribe the book on Buddha for their schools or colleges, despite the foreword, so from a worldly point of view nothing came of the enterprise. I decided that it was not appropriate for me to waste my time and energy on mercenary writing. Once when we were in Madras, Swami Ramdas came there and visited the house of a friend. My wife went to see him, but I did not. He made a good impression, genial, open-hearted, but not the majesty of Bhagavan. He was a simple, childlike person who saw the potential beauty in everyone, saw everyone as a manifestation of God, and he himself was permanently imbued with the grace of God. He had many ardent followers, some of them devotees of Bhagavan. One of them, a friend of ours, asked him some years after Bhagavan's death, why he did not stay at Tiruvannamalai, and he replied, "Would you put a candle in the same room with the flaming sun?" I corresponded with him over a sentence in his book World is God, an account of his 1954 world tour, which read like a denial that Bhagavan had disciples, and he explained that he had not intended it to have that meaning. He quite realized that we were Bhagavan's disciples, and indeed owed his illumination to the grace of Bhagavan. He had meant only that Bhagavan did not give formal initiation. Later he was kind enough to write a foreword to the incredible Sai Baba for me. Anandamayi Ma, a famous woman saint of North India, came to Tiruvannamalai a few years after Bhagavan left the body, but we were away in the hills at the time and missed seeing her. She prostrated herself before his tomb, saying, "He is the ocean and we are the rivers that run into it." 146 During the summer holidays of 1957 I was working on Buddhism and Christianity in the light of Hinduism at Tiruvannamalai and was much impressed by the division of aspirants in the early Buddhist texts into non-returners, once returners, twice returners and so forth, according to whether this was the last incarnation that would be necessary or whether one or more rebirths would be needed to complete the karma and attain nirvana. I saw a resemblance to my going back into the world to earn a living and then being drawn home again to Tiruvannamalai, and I found myself frequently repeating, "May I be a once returner," in this sense of returning only one more year to Calcutta and then coming to Tiruvannamalai for good, to settle down there. It was only in this sense that I used the phrase, for I should never have willingly considered returning for another incarnation. Indeed, once during an illness in Madras, my vital force seemed to be sinking right down and the last thought that remained in my mind was, "Let me go or stay, but let me not come back." Actually, the idea of coming back, the idea that there is any ego to come back and be born again, is a sinking to the exoteric level. It is the same error that I referred to in Chapter 8, of ascribing a temporary existence to the unreal and forgetting that there is no existence of the unreal and no non-existence of the real. This was not the prayer that I uttered. Indeed, after coming to Bhagavan I never prayed for anything, except sometimes for greater energy and determination on the quest, and that prayer is part of the quest itself. Not that there is anything against prayer in the sense of request. If a man makes physical and mental efforts to attain his desires, it is only sensible to make spiritual efforts also. But the man who follows the direct path of self-enquiry is striving to dissolve the ego that has the desires. 147. So how can he at the same time pray to gratify them? It would be contradictory, going against his own efforts, however high or unselfish the desires may seem to be. He simply lets things come as they will, asking to whom it is that they come. Even the path of devotion and submission leaves no place for prayer in the sense of petition if it is as wholehearted as Bhagavan demanded. Asking is not submitting. If one is totally submitted to the will of God, the only prayer that remains is, "Thy will be done." And since one knows that God's will is always done, whether one prays for it or not, even that becomes redundant. All one can say is, "I surrender myself to you, do as you like with it." And beyond even that comes the attitude, "There is nothing to surrender. All this is yours. I surrender only the false idea I had that it was mine." But, as with art and literature, it is a question of what is the alternative. If the alternative is reliance on the ego, or on chance or worldly influence or other people, then prayer is better. It is only fair to add that there are plenty of devotees of Bhagavan who do pray to him and that their prayers are answered. My frequent repetition, "May I be a once returner," certainly came very near to being a prayer, even though it was not formally so, and was not so intended. When we got back to Calcutta, I had the constant feeling that our stay there was not for long, though it was impossible to envisage how the change could come about. Then, less than a month before the next summer holiday, it was as though Bhagavan picked up the kaleidoscope and shook it and all the pieces fell into shape. Adam got a place at a university, with a grant to cover his expenses. Frania passed her senior Cambridge and left school, deciding that she did not want to go on to college. My health deteriorated, making professional life more difficult. The school 148 paid me a bonus as well as my provident fund. It was arranged that several newspapers would send to me at Tiruvannamalai books for review. Suddenly retirement had become possible. My whole professional life had been unsatisfactory, with frequent changes and insecurity, which was but a natural repercussion of my rejection of security and status when at Oxford. And yet I was now enabled to retire at 51, when many more successful men, in the worldly sense of success, had years of professional work still before them. In April 1958 we packed up and left Calcutta for good. We thought we knew hardly anyone there, but our compartment was full of flowers when the train pulled out, and there was a farewell crowd on the platform. That was on the 12th of April. When we drew up in Madras on the morning of the 14th, we found the station beflagged and a festive air everywhere, as though in greeting, and we were told that April 14th was Tamil New Year's Day. We stayed with friends and spent the night in Madras, leaving on the evening of the 15th and arriving early next morning in Tiruvannamalai. At the ashram also we found festivity, as though for our arrival. It turned out that the anniversary of Bhagavan's leaving the body, originally on the 14th of April but varying with the phases of the moon, like the Western Easter, fell on the 1/6 that year. In such ways we were made to see that the homecoming was auspicious. When people began to ask, as usual, how soon we had to go back, we were able to answer, not at all. At last we had come home. No place had been our home before this. We had been spiritual wayfarers, and this state had been reflected in a nomadic life on earth. Gdynia, Bangkok, Madras, Calcutta, all seemed mere temporary camping places. In none of them had we struck roots and felt at home. Even 149, our previous stay at Tiruvannamalai had had a temporary atmosphere about it, partly from the knowledge that we should have to go out into the world again to a professional life, and partly because of the difficulty of finding permanent accommodation before our own house was built, so that we had 3 abodes in less than 3 years. We had had a close family life, but now 2 of our children were gone out into the world and the 3rd was soon to follow. We had made a few friends, formed no attachments. For the wayfarer there can only be companionship with fellow pilgrims upon the path, and they are few. Retirement did not mean a life of hobbies and gentle pottering, but only of a more complete dedication, more constant effort. Indeed, it is dangerous for one on the quest to retire from life in the world too early. If the mind is not yet capable of holding daylong to the quest, it is better for it to have some surface activity such as professional work. Failing this, it will find relief in trivialities, daydreaming, imagination or erudition, or fall into some false kind of half-sleep, half-trance. In some way its keenness will be impaired. Bhagavan was gracious to us. My wife was able to divide the day between housework and meditation, while I found occupation in my book reviewing and in editing the collected works and the teachings. Gradually, as such occupations dwindled, isolated days began to appear, or even a whole week, when there was no outer activity for the mind, and I found it possible most of the time to remain poised in the current of awareness, conscious of outer things but with the mind almost inactive, neither fretting at its inactivity nor plunging into trivialities or forced activity. Nevertheless, it was a constant effort at first and was very tiring. Apart from our own sadhana or spiritual efforts, we found 150 in another way also that it was good that we should be here. So many visitors come to Tiruvannamalai, many of them for the first time, from many different countries, and they expect to find a few people resident here who can tell them about Bhagavan and explain his teaching. Many made friends with us or stayed with us here. They wrote about their desire to return. Even when that was not possible, the visit often marked a stage on their path. About 2 years after my retirement I began for the first time to see my whole past life quite objectively, as though it concerned some other person or some previous incarnation. Not only that, but it took form in my mind, word for word, just as I would tell it to someone if the need arose, and going right back to infancy. This was an asset on the quest, revealing much that had hitherto remained obscure. Nevertheless, it began to occupy my mind so much as to interfere with meditation. Was I to go back on my determination to write no more books? There it was, already written in my head, and it was not the sort of book on some subject which I had renounced. It was, though not in the sense I had envisaged, a book about the quest itself. I repeatedly turned away from it, but it did not disappear from my mind. Then I remembered what Bhagavan had said about one of the 5 hymns to Arunachala, that the words of the beginning of it rose up before him and, even though he dismissed them, saying, "What have I to do with these words?" they kept coming back till he wrote them down. Was it a book that had to get written? In order to see, I wrote out the first chapter, scarcely stopping to think, just word for word, as it was in my mind. Immediately my thoughts left that period of my life, not even coming back to it, but concentrating on the next. So I wrote out the next 2, and 151 thus chapter by chapter till I had written the whole book, which I thought was here ended. I must admit, though, that I afterwards worked for nearly a year on its revision and amplification. Still the question of publication remained, whether it was legitimate to inflict my personal life on others. I worked on it for a couple of years more, cutting out here and adding there, until what finally remained was indeed a story of the quest. And by that time I had discovered that the book was not ended but had further chapters. 14 continued quest. Of course, the book was not ended, because the quest still continued. Progress was still in waves. They were more visible now and followed one another more closely, while the troughs between them were shorter and less deep and gloomy. Nevertheless, any trough at all had become intolerable. Even a day or a part of a day deprived of the current of awareness was like being thrust down into an underground cell with no sunlight or fresh air, no freedom of movement. The time had come when the very concept of any other mode of life was unthinkable. After about 3 years a series of great waves started, each one beginning at the crest and gradually subsiding into a level stretch, when it was necessary to cling to it tenaciously till the next wave arose. Each constituted a new mode of approach, one might almost say a new revelation, not to be lost in the end but rather absorbed as another strand in the totality of 153 meditation. Such stages are not merely successive but can be progressive also. The account that follows was written piece by piece, like a diary, and therefore the perspective changes to some extent as the path ascends higher up the mountainside. First came a wave of concentration on pure being. Bhagavan had said that what is necessary is not to be conscious of being a man or woman or father or son or a businessman or office goer, but simply to be, and now, like floodgates opened over arid land, it was suddenly easy. It happened naturally, without effort. Flow. Can there be effort to be oneself? One cannot do other than slipping off unobserved into thought or bringing up some urgent problem which would not be in the least urgent if one had a visitor to talk to or a book to read, or simply feeling sleepy. The only way is to persevere. With persistence the mind can be both strengthened and disciplined in this way and its intuitive powers developed. This practice of self-awareness is close to the Buddhist practice of mindfulness. Whatever you are doing, be mindful of doing it. When you shave, shave. Don't speculate what letters will come with the morning post. When you eat, eat. Don't read the paper or chatter while doing so. These 2 exercises are not alternatives to self-enquiry but can supplement it. If self-enquiry is a concentrated effort when you are alone, morning and evening, these can be practiced unobserved at any time. To return to my story. Some weeks later, when the power of this meditation had waned, I woke up slowly one morning. To be more precise, consciousness returned without being focused at once on the I thought. The dream sequence just left behind was seen on one side and the waking sequence soon to come on the other. 154 One cannot be other than oneself. Only one's restless thoughts entangle being in a cocoon of multiform anxiety. Now, quite suddenly, but with gradually diminishing force and clarity over the ensuing weeks, it was possible to feel the simple being, the simple I amness. There was no need to sit in a fixed posture for it. It could be evoked, or came spontaneously without evocation, at any time, while sitting, walking, even talking, while getting breakfast in the morning or tea in the afternoon, because I took over these lighter chores. My day began with meditation from 5 to 6 in the morning, and then I got up, had my bath, pottered about the garden till 7 and then got breakfast. From 8 till nearly 9 I sat in meditation at the ashram during the chanting of the Vedas, then waited there for the post, which came between 9 and half past. As explained in chapter 10, man has 3 states or functions: action, thought and being, and of these being is obviously the essential, since he cannot act or think unless he first is, whereas he always is whether he thinks and acts or not, for instance, in deep sleep. And yet thought and action so cover over being that he is usually unaware of it. Let me add here, in parenthesis, that awareness of being is a very useful spiritual exercise that can be practiced daily. Sitting in your armchair or on a bus seat, or standing in a queue, just be aware of yourself. There is no need to close your eyes, because the environment also can be noticed, no need for strain or tension. Indeed, it is an exercise rather in relaxation than concentration. There is only one condition: that the mind should not be allowed to wander away from this awareness into any train of thought. For instance, you can see the clock on the shelf and hear it ticking, but not think that you paid too much for it or wonder whether Aunt 155 Jane will like it or whether you forgot to wind it up. If some more definite focus for the attention is needed, the most suitable is your own breathing, not trying to regulate it or force it into any pattern, just watching it. Simple as this exercise is, it may not be easy at first, because the mind is as restless as a monkey and resists quiet in every way it can, like floating on the surface of consciousness without affecting it. Bhagavan had said that the state to be aimed at is a sort of waking sleep, also that it can be experienced at the moment between waking and sleeping. I prolonged the state as long as possible. During the weeks that followed, this formed my mode of meditation, particularly, of course, while waking from sleep. While falling asleep I found it more difficult, but also throughout the day, retiring into impersonal consciousness, seeing the flow of events drift past on its surface. Paradoxically, this state of sleep is also the true waking state, sleep, because untroubled by differentiation, although in consciousness, not, like physical sleep, in darkness. Waking, because truly aware, despite the twofold veil of illusion, that of dreams of night and that of apparent waking world by day. Some weeks later, this meditation also had lost its vigor, and one morning, soon after waking, an old vasana asserted itself. It is said that the last to go is the sexual urge. Angry and disappointed at this resurgence of a vasana, I turned to self-inquiry. There can't be a vasana unless there is someone to have it. Who is it that has this vasana? Who am I? This time, however, the use of self-inquiry as a weapon proved unnecessary. When at 8 o'clock that morning I sat down as usual before the tomb of Bhagavan at the ashram to meditate during the chanting of the Vedas, the thought came, why occupy your mind with physical union when you can turn it to the 156 Universal Spiritual Union? Therewith a flood of grace swept over me, setting up a meditation on all things going out from the One, as a man's breath spreads out when he exhales in frosty air, and at the same time yearning back towards unity in the One. Thought, meditation? What word can one find to describe an inner certitude which is not clearly defined like a theory and which is so far from being merely mental that it carries with it a wave of joy and a tingling of the body reaching to the very toes and fingertips? Not realization, because it seems best to reserve that for the supreme state of realized unity. When modern philosophers pride themselves on having progressed beyond the saints and philosophers of earlier times who put faith above reason, they are misunderstanding the meaning of the word faith. They regard it as simply believing something is true because one has been told so, whereas, at least in some cases, it must be referring to an inner certitude such as I am trying to describe, which really is beyond reason. Even as this meditation started, I appreciated, despite its magnificence, that it was on a lower level than self-inquiry or the two previous approaches, since it presumed the existence of all this. Nevertheless, I told myself, it was useful because it supplied the element of prem, love, and ananda, bliss, which had hitherto been rather lacking in my sadhana. Also, it served the immediate purpose of dissolving the sexual urge. Just as, at an earlier stage of sadhana, the desire to smoke had vanished as soon as the true substitute for it appeared, so now with this. If anyone should ask why this meditation on unity should be presumed right, and dwelling on physical union wrong, the answer is simple. On the spiritual path, whatever hardens and exaggerates the illusion of a separate individual being is harmful. Whatever weakens or dissolves it is beneficial. 157. The second great command of Judaism and Christianity, to love your neighbor as yourself, is a corollary of the first, to love God wholeheartedly, because it is only when you yearn towards the One and see all beings equally as emanations from or manifestations of the One that equal love flows out to them. There is tremendous wealth and power in the meditation on unity. All the events of your life, and those still to be enacted, all the people you have known, yourself among them, all the epics of history, the eons of the geologist, the inscrutable worlds of the astronomer, all expanding from the focal point within you. And all this is no dull, earthy union but an incandescent white flame. Powers and experiences could probably be achieved this way, to one in whose nature it was they might come unsought. It is better to avoid them. This continued to be my sadhana for some weeks, and then towards morning one night I repeatedly woke or half woke from sleep, reminding myself that I must pull my mind away from the current of dreams it was pursuing and fix it in meditation. On finally awakening, I saw that the same applied to the daytime sequence of events also. All this, including thinking about it, writing about it, trying to awake from it, is a current of dreams. One has to renounce it and fix the mind in meditation. This now became my mode of approach. It is a wonderful weapon against distracting thoughts and against any regret or desire, not wanting to change the course of the dream but simply to wake up from it. The self which I am is dreaming me, the individual me, and all this world, as well as other individuals and their worlds. That is the meaning of the story of Krishna embracing at the same time every one of his 16,000 wives, each in her own room of the palace. Therefore what has to be done is to 158 submit, take life as it comes, let things happen, while at the same time striving to wake up from it all. As long as it is taken to be real, the dream cannot be recognized as one and therefore there is no awakening. In fact, the one thing necessary is to eliminate by any and every means the sense of being an individual entity. Gradually over the course of 2 days the attempt to wake up changed this. There is consciousness but not a me who is conscious, there is action but no one who acts. The mind is like a mill grinding the thoughts that we constantly feed into it in an unbroken though ever-changing flow, like the stream of consciousness type of novel that James Joyce originated. It doesn't care whether grave or trivial so long as it is kept constantly supplied. And at night, in dreams, it chews over the cud of what was supplied to it by day. Nearly all this activity is wasted energy. It prevents concentration and does not really clarify one's mind. And all of it is based on the very assumption one is trying to destroy of an individual being who decides and acts. So I began instead to suspend thought, refusing to feed anything into the mill, retaining only pure consciousness, and, of course, observation of things happening. The mind was allowed to deal with anything requiring thought as and when it arose, but not to prefigure it before it arose or reenact it after it was finished. I was surprised how simple and what a relief this was and wondered why I had not started doing it systematically long before, and then it occurred to me that without a good deal of previous meditation it would not have been feasible. Until it has been brought well under control, the mind abhors a vacuum. Even now this practice proved far from easy once the surge of grace that always accompanied a new approach had passed. On the other hand, it began to occur spontaneously without effort. 159 and the result? Not boredom, as some might suppose. Boredom is in the mind, in fact is the mind's defense against anything approaching a vacuum. Rather there was an immense euphoria. Not any sort of vision or experience, for that would imply the duality of knower and known, or, more correctly, the triplicity of seer, sight and seen, whereas pure consciousness is the unity beyond this. The flow of idle, ceaseless thoughts is as much a hindrance to meditation as are attachments. In this way it is stilled. The mind by nature is feminine, that is, passive and receptive. Instead it makes itself masculine, imagining itself to be originating and creating. In doing so it postulates a fictitious ego. It becomes so busy and so persistently turned out towards its imaginary creations that it makes itself oblivious to the higher perceptions it should receive. The task is to turn it right again, from creating a mirage to receiving impressions of reality. It is very hard for the mind to understand that it has to do nothing to attain realization. In fact, it is itself the hindrance and has only to stop interfering. That is why Bhagavan said that you have only to disrealize unreality and reality will be realized. It is the mind that creates the unreality. The Quran repeatedly enjoins not to make mischief in the land, and the Tao Te Ching says that the less the emperor governs, the happier and more prosperous the people are. The meaning is the same. The mind is the emperor or the mischief maker. It has only to keep quiet and one's nature, the empire, will develop in all its pristine purity. The purpose of meditation is to steady the mind and prevent it jumping and chattering like a monkey by holding it to one thought. If you suspend its activity without the one thought, that is still better. If it becomes too restive, the best way of controlling it is either by an act of self-enquiry, turning 160 steadily to see whether it really exists or not, and what it is that exists, or by an act of faith and submission, resigning yourself to keep still and let the unknown take charge. That is what Christ meant by laying down one's life for his sake. He who lays down his conscious mind for Christ's sake, for the spirit, the unknown, will find it. But also he who clings to it, seeking to preserve it, will lose it. This approach continued for over 8 weeks and was then replaced by humdrum, pedestrian, but very necessary technique introduced not by a new surge of grace, as previous ones had been, but by a dream. I dreamed that Bhagavan came to the house for me, but as I was leaving with him I saw a low fire burning on the drive outside and understood that I must first put it out for fear that the strong wind that was blowing might carry sparks to the house and start a conflagration. The fire, of course, was the ego, made up of vasanas, desires, interests, attachments. The dream might be called satisfactory insofar as it was only embers, not a blaze, and not in the house but outside. However, I felt it dismal that there should still be a fire to put out at all. Thereupon I started a straight fight with vasanas, or, I hoped, a mopping up operation, hunting them out of their hideouts and setting on them any desires or attractions, any thoughts, however slight, of what would happen, since the future exists as definitely as the past, any dwelling on books I had read, a state of constant vigilance. The heathen were weak and scattered when the Israelites conquered the Holy Land, but they should have been exterminated. Because they were not, they grew strong and became a menace later, an excellent allegory of the remaining vasanas. They were the embers which might spark a fire. 161. This was in November 1961. The previous winter I had suffered from a severe bronchial infection leading to suffusion of the lungs and suffocating attacks, and for a while recovery was considered doubtful. It was cured through my wife's homeopathic treatment, but there was continued shortness of breath and liability to a relapse. At this time a relapse did occur, perhaps due to my carelessness in continuing to sleep with open windows once the cool night winds had set in. Anyway, giving no thought to the outcome was a good opportunity for the attack on verses as Annas. From renunciation of vasanas to abnegation of the ego that has them. Then what remains? Only the experience of being, with the mind as a servant registering impressions, not an independent being reliving the past or anticipating the future. But it required continuous effort and alertness to retain this state. Particularly was this so now, because there was no new surging of grace, while the vitality was lowered by sickness and the whole day was free for the task. No books came for review, no work of any kind, and I was not well enough to lend a hand in the house or garden. For 3 days old vasanas rose up again, such as I had believed long dead, even regret for my youthful folly and for the loss of an Oxford career. The next day I was able to go to the ashram again for the first time since my illness. Entering the old hall, where I had sat so often before Bhagavan, I sat down in the same place before his couch, on which his full-length portrait now rested, and waited for an answer, puzzled and dejected by this new counterattack but determined not to give in to it. The thought arose in my mind as an answer. This is like the assault of the old Vasanas upon Buddha during his night of vigil under the Bodhi tree before his final awakening. 162 With some clear understanding of the meaning I felt better. Physically my cough was clearing out old deposits from the lungs, spiritually old Vasanas were being cleared out from the mind. I found that it was equally possible to maintain impersonal awareness or to let the mind display its magic box of tricks. There was attraction both ways, but it was possible to choose awareness and hold it. No new approach came, none was needed now that simple being, impersonal awareness, was possible. It became a straight fight with thoughts. Some, the powerful, emotion-laden ones, would crash through the hedge and have to be met head-on and driven back. Others, more subtle, would wriggle in like serpents and get a grip before they could be observed. It was a ding-dong battle. Day and night it went on. At night the defenses are weakened, and I would wake up and catch the mind rambling through a useless sequence of dreams. There is the clear, vivid, symbolical dream that can be a useful indicator of one's state, but there is also the endless, worthless, confused dream sequence which merely picturizes the daytime thoughts and impulses. It was this that I was at war with. I would wake up and pull the mind back to quiet. It might be necessary to sit up in meditation for a while to clear out the rubbish. With effort, control was established and the dream rambling stopped. By daytime also the revolt of the Vasanas died down. Sat Sibat Ananda the TME state is called, being consciousness bliss. Ultimately they fuse into one. In fact they are three aspects of the same. There was already the experience of being and the impersonal awareness, but not the bliss which should draw the mind of its own volition to this state and make it abide there effortlessly, overriding any counter-attraction that might seek to draw it outwards. 163 There are cases, on a devotional and ecstatic path, where the aspect of bliss develops first. Despite the intense joy, this is more dangerous and less satisfactory. The times of joy are interspersed with periods of black misery when the face of the beloved is veiled. Moreover, the violent alternation and passionate longing may induce irrational behavior or even overbalance the mind. Therefore, for instance, it is a dictum of the Sufi masters that the path of sobriety is preferable to that of inebriation. Even so powerful a master as Ramakrishna was thought mad when he first became immersed in ecstasy. At this stage one had a sudden impulse to be afraid and draw back. This is a temptation which must be unhesitatingly cast aside or it may vitiate a lifetime's striving. It is as though a man were to toil through dense forest and craggy mountain, in hardship and frequent danger, seeking the heavenly city, and then, when its outer ramparts at last loom up, separated from him only by a narrow chasm, or to turn aside, fearing to jump. Henceforth he sits listlessly by the wayside or wanders without aim, unable to return to the state of spiritual ignorance from which he started but without initiative to press forward. There are many such derelicts. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune, omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea we are now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves, or lose our venture. Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, Act 4, Scene 3. However, it should be added that this depressing prospect, like I said twice before in this book about the many who are called but not chosen, is depressing only from the narrow. 164 Viewpoint of this lifetime. Actually, a man's whole course or life sequence is a journey leading through however many twists and turns, ravines and bare hillsides, marshy jungles and thirsty plains, to the goal of supreme bliss that is his true nature. It is a pilgrimage lasting many days, each day being one lifetime. A whole day may be wasted. A man may scramble down the hillside after gleaming berries that turn out sour or poisonous when plucked, or he may play around and reach no shelter by nightfall. But the path remains, ineluctable. He has only made the next day's journey more arduous. The discovery that life is a pilgrimage, that it has a goal and therefore a meaning, is an immense blessing, but it does not necessarily mean that the goal will be attained in this lifetime. The number of days still required would depend partly on the distance from the goal, partly on the energy with which the pilgrim presses forward. Such advance as he does make is not wasted, even though he grows tired and relaxes his efforts before the end of the day. He will wake up so much further forward for the next day's journey. This is expressly guaranteed in the Bhagavad Gita. He who fell from yoga is born, again, in a pure and fortunate house. Or he even comes into a family of wise yogis, though a birth such as this is very hard to obtain in this world. There he obtains the Buddhic attainments of his previous incarnations, and thence he again strives for full accomplishment. Ch. 6, version 40-43, trans. Ernest Wood. But what of the objections of Christian and Muslim readers who say they do not believe in reincarnation but in an afterlife of heaven or hell? Believe in is such an unsatisfactory term, it is better to understand. There is indeed an afterlife of heaven or hell, on the relative plane, as Buddhism and Hinduism also teach. All this is as real as you are to yourself, Bhagavan said in reply to a 165 question. This is the state in which the soul reaps the good or evil karma which it has laid up for itself in the life on earth. But after this has been exhausted it comes back to continue its course, to make new karma, good or bad, in a new life, starting at the level to which it had arisen or sunk in its previous life. For one who has intuitively understood the ultimate truth of oneness, it is not a matter of belief or even argument. It follows naturally that the ultimate and eternal state cannot be a state of multiplicity and diversity. In the beginning there was God alone. On that they agree. That is the eternal reality. Apart from that, whatever is called into being had a beginning and is therefore not eternal. Whatever had a beginning must have an end, be it heaven, earth or hell. It is that end, attained consciously and therefore in pure beatitude, which is the goal towards which the pilgrim strives. If any say that they do not want to attain it because it means giving up their individuality, they have Christ's blunt reply, that he who clings to his life will lose it. And in any case, what they are clinging to is an illusion, and an illusion is not eternal. Sooner or later, if not in this lifetime, they will understand. But they may create much suffering for themselves on the way. Modern Christian writers have argued a lot from an anthropomorphic level about what they call the question of suffering. It is indeed unanswerable from this level, where a venerable old man called God is supposed to send his children out onto earth for a few years, for no apparent purpose, and then call them back and reward or punish them endlessly, century after century, millennium after millennium, eon after eon, through and beyond all recordable time, for the way they behaved there. At least, one would say, he might let them be happy during their brief moment of fate creating life. But from a higher viewpoint the question fades out and ceases to exist. Since life has 166 a purpose, the attainment of the supreme goal, the measuring rod is not the amount of enjoyment obtained or of pain avoided but the distance traveled towards the goal or away from it, that is to say the development of favorable or unfavorable latent qualities, leaving man in a better or worse state than before. The real gauge of success or failure in life is the state in which a man is when his time comes to leave it. Obviously, going against the purpose of life, which means against one's own true nature, causes suffering. Following it removes suffering. One does not find the saints in any religion complaining of suffering. In fact, their most obvious common characteristic is happiness and contentment, even though afflicted by sickness or poverty or other apparent ills. Nor is the egoist truly happy, though his circumstances may appear fortunate. The four basic truths on which Buddhism is based go straight to the heart of the matter. There is suffering, the state of spiritual ignorance. There is a cause for suffering, clinging to ephemeral and apparent reality and ignoring the purpose of life. There is relief from suffering, by relinquishing the unreal and turning to the real. And there is a way to attain this relief, the quest. One last explanation to remove another barrier that theorists unnecessarily raise up against one another. How does this doctrine of a path trod over many lifetimes accord with the Buddhist doctrine of anatta, that there is no ego to experience heaven or hell or to be reborn or tread the path? Hindu teachers say the same. When Bhagavan was asked about rebirth he would be quite likely to answer, first find out whether you were born now. The whole point of self-enquiry is to break through the apparent reality of the ego to its true unreality. There is no existence of the unreal and no non-existence of the real. Therefore the realized man does not go to heaven at death end. 167 is reborn on earth, he just is. However, for one who has not realized the self, an illusory ego appears to exist in this life and therefore appears to survive it and follow stage after stage of the path. It may be good to remember in theory that this is only an appearance, but what is needed is to realize it. And now to return to my story. In order to safeguard against any traces of hesitance, I began to practice dying. That is being in readiness to lay down life or the mind completely. There must be no stipulation that perception of a body and world should be restored again after dying, because that would be bargaining, not surrender. If they are restored, all right, if not, all right. You are not ready to wake up from a dream if you stipulate that you should still watch its course, like a cinema, after waking. If you do, all right. If it vanishes into wakefulness, all right. Also, the readiness to die must not be because life is sour or oppressive or futile. That, the suicide's attitude, carries with it the obverse, that if conditions were changed and made attractive you would cling to life. That is not surrender but rebellious rejection of the terms of life offered to you. I had the feeling. I am ready to give up my life but it is not accepted. What am I to do now? The whole day it continued, and so poignant that the thought kept coming. This is a theme for a poem. What a pity I'm not a poet. The next day too the same feeling continued, and the same thought about the poem. In the evening I was compelled to write it and found to my surprise that it was a poem. Indeed, the second verse was so poignant that I could not read it through without tears coming. From then on the book continued in the form of poems. I never knew in advance what they would be about. Indeed, I sometimes prepared a list of themes that I wanted to write about, but when a poem came it might be on something quite different. 168 Nevertheless, they continued, though in an indirect way, to be a record of the quest and therefore, although each one is a separate poem and can be read by itself, if read together it should be consecutively. For instance, it would not make sense to read the first after the second, or either of them after the third. The third is an example of an important phenomenon, that some of them described a state not yet permanently mastered. I felt some hesitation at first as to whether it was sincere to write such poems, but they came and demanded to be written, and later on fragments of them would constantly recur to me, like a mantram, and were a means of help on the path. Perhaps they will be to others also. I never knew when they would come and in what form. It was quite irregular. For instance, Waking and Sleeping took about 2 weeks to write. A fragment, perhaps no more than a line and a half, coming one day and then, after several days' interval, another fragment. On the other hand, The Expanse and Be Still were both written the same day. After the first few poems, I found that they tended to be either blank verse or regular rhyme lyrics, the more philosophical being blank verse and the more intuitive lyrics. The outer difference between poetry and prose being that poetry is formal and disciplined language and prose comparatively informal and undisciplined, it seems to me unnatural to write formless poetry. If it is not going to conform to the discipline of verse, let it be prose. Or silence. 169 poems. A testament poem this believe. I tell you what I know from own experience, nothing of hearsay, what I have tried and proved and found it so, following a guide, a master of the way. Section 1. But first, what sense perception tells us all. The world in endless vista trails away into a past remote beyond recall. Endlessly too the future looms ahead. Between the two your pinpoint life days fall, from the being born up to the being dead. And then the ripples that you caused subside. Another holds your office, sleeps in your bed, while life moves on with unperturbed stride, as though you had not been. Even while you are, nothing is there secure, little for pride. Health is on loan from time, frustrations mar ambition and achievement, friendships end in death or forgetting. From afar old age creeps on, filching the zest you lend to work and pleasure, chilling the vital power, still narrowing the circle you defend of life's attachments, till the final hour when thoughts, drawn in from schemes for which you fought, from work you lived for, office held or power, from wife and friend, from child, things sold and bought. 172 converge on one point only, your next breath, stripped of attachment, to naked being brought, to be squeezed out through the narrow womb of death. Section 2. So far goes sight, so far men agree, but probing into what comes after death their views diverge. Varied but mainly three the stands they take. Some there are who hold death as the end, nothing again to be, nothing to know, for all your tale is told, and that poor thing that rots in the dark ground is all that is of the once manifold lover of fair faces and sweet sound that trod the earth and thought that he was you. Others there are who see life girdled round with brighter spheres of forms forever new, as much more vivid than the earth forms here as peacock's throat than sparrow's dingy hue. There, a spaceless, there, as dreams appear, forces bred up on earth but out of sight, courage that goes straight on in spite of fear, or twisted guilt submerged from the clear light of conscious mind. Rise and surround a man in outer forms of terror or delight. His own brood, hidden for the earth lifespan, now torturing his disembodied soul eternally if evil, but for who ran life's race on earth to the appointed goal peace everlasting, bliss past words to tell. 173 others declare that this is not the whole. One season's harvest can't forever sell, or one life's balance, whether good or bad, consign eternally to heaven or hell. Man's inner life materializes, clad in incorporeal forms, they too admit. But thus the reckoning, whether glad or sad, is closed, books balanced. There's an end of it. Thence he returns once more to life on earth, at that same level he himself made fit by use or misuse of his former birth. Free once again to rise, or free to sink, the architect again of his own worth. Again the bell tolls. Again the brink of death is crossed to living more intense, more heaven or hell, than earth-bound mind can think. Thus a man's life brings on its recompense, rising before him. Inexorably the wheel swings round from grove to harvest, from the dense earth life that builds to regions that reveal what there he built. And thus from life to life can man increase in stature, till he feel a brimming joy in what before was strife and no more yearn to earthways, no more cling to memory or desire, as with a knife cut off all craving. Nothing again can bring rebirth or grief or death to such a one, free as the stars, free as the winds that sing his glory on the hilltops, beyond the sun, in his own radiance gloriously bedite, absorbed unending in the unbegun, beyond the parting of the day and night, changeless, he sees the changing world aright. 174 Section 3 Not equally at fault these views. The first alone is wholly wrong. The next contains all that man needs of truth to be well versed in his own interest, and from petty gains followed by great loss to turn and seek his heritage of bliss, purchased by pains prepaid but transient, in prospect bleak, like Muslim's dower for his unseen bride, in retrospect nothing of which to speak. The third view also can as well provide incentive and a way, all that men need. Yet these three views of man, however wide they move apart, all spring from the same seed of error, for they all alike declare you are that sentient body whence proceed cravings like roots, like branches in the air thoughts and ideals, hedged by necessity. Mere fantasy, no such thing as there. You are pure consciousness, eternity, wherein birth, death and world are but such stuff as dreams are made on. No hyperbole, just as a nighttime dream seems real enough, so long as it lasts, within your mortal mind, so your life's journey, whether smooth or rough, between deep hedgerows fragrantly entwined with honeysuckle, all the air athrob with singing of the birds, your steps combined with those of loved companion, such as rob exhaustion of its pain, night of its fears, or over arid crags, where not to sob. 175 For weariness were hard when the sun sears and only thorn trees cast a stunted shade, while all ahead the naked shale appears. All that same dream stuff out of which is made you mortal self. All that is known or seen, with you in it, a pageant is, displayed harmless in you, like pictures on a screen. Awake, for dawn has set the sky aflame. Awake from dreaming what has never been to find the universe entire a game forever change, you evermore the same. Section 4. This does not mean there are two selves in you, one universal and the other bound by name and form, a transient being who from birth to death treads out his little round. Rather amnesia, one born rich and great, preeminent over all around, forgets his own identity, so fate leads him to some factory that is his, did he but know, to queue up at the gate, imploring work. Only one self he is, yet twofold. So long as he forgets, a life of labor and indignities. Remember, and fate instantly resets life as it was before misfortune's drag. Or that poor knight who, fallen in folly's nets, traveled Spain's dusty roads on a lean nag, windmills for foes, delusion for a flag. 176 Section 5. How, from pure consciousness quite unalloyed, unfettered being, unimpeded bliss, was that high equilibrium destroyed and your eternal state brought down to this? And why? Such questions not at all contribute to man's awaking. Not that is amiss can they set right. Every such dispute is useless, but not harmless. It misleads, lending this seeming world the attribute of real being, of something that proceeds in course of time from that eternal state that was before. Thus ignorantly it pleads the cause of ignorance. In truth time's spate of endless